Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to another episode of Tristan and the Classics. I hope that you are feeling well and cock-a-hoot with life in general. In this video we're going to be taking a look at 5 books which I've read in this month of March, and giving a brief overview of them and rating them as to how good I think they are for others to read. So without further ado, let's get stuck in, shall we? If you followed my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I've never done a monthly wrap-up of the books I've read before. And the reason for that is because, well, I didn't see why anyone would care, really. It's one thing for me to discuss books in depth, which is nice to hear those things on YouTube. But as for me as a person, I mean, who am I? I'm a nobody. So why should people listen to what I've been reading in a month? That's what I thought. Until I observed that I really like watching other people's monthly wrap-ups, because you get a nice overview of a book, no spoilers, and you think, what, I'll have me a bit of that. That sounds great, just the ticket. And so I thought that's what I'd do for this video, is just tell you the 5 books I've read this month, what they're about, and how much I rate them, and whether you might be interested. If you want me to do more monthly wrap-up videos like this, please, 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 comment below, because it helps me build a channel and content that you enjoy watching. I don't want to give out stuff you don't enjoy watching. So let's have a shufty at the 5 books, shall we? First up is The Mayor of Casterbridge, one of the 12 books I guaranteed myself that I would read this year. The Mayor of Casterbridge, written by Thomas Hardy. Hardy is like in the echelons, the top echelons of writers. He is a master craftsman when it comes to storytelling. It's so good at focusing on a person's flaws and whether that makes them good or bad. Because I think the full title is The Mayor of Casterbridge, The Life and Death of a Man of Character. Now, when we think of character, we think of nobility, goodness, excellence, charitable, all that stuff. The Mayor of Casterbridge starts with Michael Henchard, the main character, selling his wife and baby while he's drunk. He's aggressive. He's not a pleasant character at all. So how can you call him a man of character? Well, after the initial selling of his wife and daughter, and I'm not giving anything away there because that is right at the beginning of the book. It's the rock bed on which the edifice of the book stands. 20 years later, you find him in a town where he is mayor. And for 20 years, he is not drunk because of his remorse over what he did. And then his wife and daughter come to find him. They don't know where he lives now. They don't know his position. But they find him and he is the mayor. He also is the leading corn merchant in the area. He's wealthy. And you see this man is changed and he wants to do what is good. However, during the progression of the story, you find a couple of secrets in the past from him, which cause some niggles. But you find this propensity towards being angry and feisty. And even you find this propensity for his being angry and even vindictive is not totally eradicated from him. And when the right buttons are pressed, how he almost self-destructs his entire world. He meets a character who's younger than him, who he employs, and is a boon for his business. But jealousy will get in between their relationship because of the favourability of which others speak about this young man called Farfrae, who Henchard has employed. And you see how the underlying nature of a person who may struggle with one particular weakness can corrode the bottom out of their life. But what you see is that he had been trying to make himself a better person. And through the ups and downs of him making terrible decisions, you see sometimes you really dislike him because you can see how wrong he is. But at times Hardy reins you back in and says, but he's trying to be better. And then he lets himself down again. And you're left at the end. Some people at the end are going to hate him and think that he should get his just desserts. Others will feel pity for him. Others will actually like him. But the longer you think about this book, the more you will find something about yourself in him. Not that you may be inclined to an aggressive nature, but we all have weaknesses. And no matter how hard we try, there's some parts of our nature that, given time, will always find their way to the surface again. I don't normally rate books, but for the sake of a wrap-up and whether I would recommend you read something, this book is a 5 out of 5. It's definitely a book you should read with a pen in your hand, just to jot down your thoughts as you go. So that's the first one, The Mayor of Casterbridge. The second book that I thought we'd mention is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So, as you already know, a lot of you, I've already done a in-depth review of Frankenstein. Somewhere up here will be the link. So, Mary Shelley, 20 years old when she wrote this book. A masterpiece, really, of a relatively short novel. We have the account of Victor Frankenstein, who becomes obsessed with making life. He's drawn to the natural sciences, and he eventually gets to university and he wants to make life. His family, they're not so into the natural sciences, but they're a lovely family. They're loving, they're kind, they're supportive. And what Frankenstein ends up doing is he becomes such a monomaniac in his aims that he neglects his family a bit, and eventually his own creation is far more than he can handle. He creates Frankenstein's monster. The monster, of course, wreaks havoc on his life, on Victor's life, and on his family. There are 4 people killed, I won't say who, and he begins to realise that the fruitage of his ambition was beyond anything he could foresee. And through this story, Mary Shelley makes, I talk about this in my other video, she makes an acute critique of the academies and universities of the world and the human disposition to say we can do anything when we actually know so little of the consequences that we will unfold because of our actions. She explores also the need for love, kindness, compassion, family, and a foundation, a safe home, and what happens to a person without these things. Ultimately, this book explores what it really means to be a human being. A bit like Hardy, I suppose, but in a totally different way. What actually makes a human? What is the vital essence, to use an Aristotelian phrase, which qualifies a sentient being as being a human being, a person? What is it that makes that? It's quite a good read. As a story, I would rate this as 3.5 out of 5. As just a pure story. As an exploration of an idea and how classic literature can cause you to analyse the world around you, I would give it a 4 out of 5. To think that it was written by a 20-year-old, that blows me away. Frankenstein is very much worth the read if you've not read it. It's nothing like the films you've seen, nothing like the retellings. It's got a very distinct message. And yes, there are plot holes, as quite a lot of people have pointed out to me since I did my last video. There are some quite amusing plot holes, but overall, it's a good book. If you're just looking for a story, there's better out there. But if you're looking for how classic literature makes you think, yeah, it's very, very much something you should read this year. Next up from my reads this month is Patrick Susskind's Perfume. I really liked this book. I mean, really liked it. As a premise for a story, it was excellent. What you have, the main character in it is a young man called Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, if that's how you pronounce it. He is born in Paris to, I think his mum is a fishwife, and she gives birth to him in a load of offal and effluence, and she leaves him to die. But of course someone saves him. He's raised in a convent and then by some nurse in the community. And Jean-Baptiste Grenouille is an interesting character. He's a dark character because he's deprived of affection. You will find every character in this book doesn't love him for who he is, but they use him for a particular end. Whether it's ill use or just straightforward, they don't do anything bad to him, but neither do they do anything good for him. He just sort of fritters through life and develops a hatred of humanity. But, and this is where the book is outstanding. I've not read anything like this. He has a superhuman sense of smell. And by superhuman, I don't mean he wears a cape and flies around sniffing things. He can pick up the faintest scents, the faintest aromas. He can smell such distinct differences between milk at different temperatures and what the weather's like on that day. The milk, you know, calling something milk to Grenouille isn't satisfactory. It's not a good enough word because he can sense different shades or nuances of aroma. He doesn't talk much. People in his life that come across him, it's interesting what happens to them after he leaves. But he becomes obsessed with a particular smell. He can smell in the scent of Paris just one particular strain, and it's that of a young girl. And he loves that smell. It stands for so much to him. Later on, he starts learning from a man who can make perfumes the secrets of how to capture aromas. And he begins to, he's so good at it, he just knows from thinking what things you would need to make a certain aroma. But there's one smell he can't capture, and it's the smell of a young girl. And he goes on a bit of a bender trying to capture this essence. It means a lot to him. He discovers something. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's quite a novelty, actually. He discovers something about himself that is unique to other people, which is not his ability to smell, but it's something everyone has that he doesn't. And what Susskind seems to suggest is that this isolates a person completely. To some level, you could say the theme of this is about individuality, what makes an individual maneuver through life. However, it's done purely by elevating sort of the olfactory sense above all the other senses, above hearing, above eyesight, above speech even. He finds, Grenouille, that there are more different aromas than you could possibly put words to. It is an outstanding piece of literature because never have I read something described so much through the sense of smell. In fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to read you a tiny bit from the book. Grenouille sat on the logs, his legs outstretched, and his back leaned against the wall of the shed. He had closed his eyes and did not stir. He saw nothing, he heard nothing, he felt nothing. He only smelt the aroma of the wood rising up around him to be captured under the bonnet of the eaves. He drank in the aroma, he drowned in it, impregnating himself through his innermost pores until he would become wood himself. He lay on the cord of wood like a wooden puppet, like Pinocchio, as if dead, until after a long while, perhaps a half hour or more, he gagged up the word wood. And this is amongst the first of the words that he actually speaks as a child, wood, because of the smell. And then a bit later, over the page, it says, on the other hand, everyday language would soon prove inadequate for designing all the olfactory notions that he had accumulated within himself. Soon, he was no longer smelling mere wood, but kinds of wood. Maple wood, oak wood, pine wood, elm wood, pear wood, old, young, rotting, mouldering, mossy wood, down to single logs, chips, splinters. I mean, isn't that great? That's brilliant writing. And I'm a great admirer of how Susskind has put this together. As it develops, things get quite a dark and sinister turn, and it's still very captivating how he goes about his life, and it's fascinating with the insights in how to make perfume. It's just a joy to read the details of how perfume was made in the 18th century as he learns it through his eyes. There's very little dialogue in this book. It's all sort of a narrative of Grenouille. There's a little bit of dialogue, but not much. And then, strangely enough, at the end of the book, which I'm not giving anything away, it really goes off the deep end. And this is the thing I have a problem with this book. Some people love the way it ends, but I know there's such a thing as willing suspension of disbelief. But this, I feel, went too far. I speed read a little bit towards the end because of some certain activities, which I'm not a fan of reading about. But overall, the book was great. The story was great. I just felt Suskind had written himself into a corner and didn't quite know, with such an exceptional and extraordinary character, quite how to finish. And the ending for me wasn't great. And I know I'm not my own on that one. However, is it worth reading? Yes, it's very much worth reading. I've not read a book quite like it. Rating it, I would give it 5 out of 5. Its style is outstanding, like the literary style, the smoothness of its movement, its structure, the unique ideas behind it, sort of the unique theme running through it about the sense of smell. That's great, but I would only give it a 4 because I think the ending let it down terribly. However, don't let that put you off reading it. You might actually like the ending. I just thought it was bananas. However, Perfume by Patrick Suskind, yeah, you won't be disappointed in reading it. The fourth book that I read this month was by the authoress Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and it's Lady Audley's Secret, which is her most famous work. Mary Elizabeth Braddon, I don't know if you know her name, but she wrote over 80 books, and she is classed amongst the sensationalist writers, very popular amongst ladies in drawing rooms reading her works because it's full of mystery. You would class Braddon alongside Wilkie Collins, in developing that mystery genre, that detective genre, because there is a great amount of detection in this. Oh, a little word about the picture. Beautiful lady on it, all dressed in black. I thought she had mud balls thrown at her because of all these blotches on her face. Turns out, on closer inspection, it's patterns on the lace of her veil. But they really do look like she's been rolling in a brook. Other than that, fabulous. So the story, it focuses on this young lady who turns up in the village of Audley from London, and she's working for the doctor and his wife. And she's of no consequence, no background. She's just had a few recommendations and has been employed. She is beautiful, and not beautiful just in looks, but beautiful in personality. She's charming, she can laugh, she's kind, she's compassionate, she's caring. People love her, and of course many a man wants to woo her, but the one that finally proposes to her is none other than Lord Audley of the Manor. He may be older than her, but he's deeply affected by her and he deeply loves her, and he proposes and she marries him. Then things get a bit rum because she has a secret, and you get a hint of what that secret might be very early on. I think it's in chapter 3, maybe even in chapter 2, when there's a man coming home from abroad, a young man who is looking forward to seeing his wife, and when he lands it turns out that his wife is dead. However, visiting the village of Audley with his friend, you get a suspicion that he knows this girl, but then he goes missing. Now, where has he gone missing to? Now, the friend who he came with is not particularly devoted to him. However, he just finds it odd that he's gone missing, and it says he feels like he's driven by a more powerful force to find out what has happened to his friend. The link between his missing friend and Lady Audley, you could sort of readily assume quite quickly, and that's not giving anything away. However, what Mary Elizabeth Braddon does brilliantly in her writing is she never openly acknowledges what you suspect, and it always leaves you hanging on the cusp of maybe, not I'm certain, if this makes any sense to you. I know I'm talking slightly in riddles because I don't want to give too much away. However, you will not see what is coming in this book. I worked out certain things, and I thought myself rather clever for working them out, only to find out that I only half worked it out. But the ending certainly tripped me up. I did not see the book working out the way it actually worked out. I was expecting something quite different, I suppose. So it didn't have the obvious ending. And I actually love the way she justifies her ending in the final paragraph of this book. It's a really, really clever way to get around the criticism she might have had from people. And I loved it. I thought it was ever so deft a touch. And I read the final paragraph to my wife, so that might have ruined the book for her. But anyway, Lady Audley's Secret is an excellent read. Mary Elizabeth Braddon's prose is straightforward. It's like smooth stream waters rolling over smooth rounded rocks. You know, it just undulates and flows and trickles. There's nothing sharp or caustic about it. It pulls you along. It's a really good story. Does it have any deeper meanings? No, not in my opinion. It's just a good sensationalist novel. It's a good what happened here novel. Who did what to whom? Who's got the darkest past, and will they get away with it? So I really recommend this book. Again, what would I rate it? 4 out of 5. Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. The last book that I read this month was The Black Tulip by Alexander Dumas. Or as my young boy said, laughing hysterically as he found my book, who's Alexander Dumas? So a little teaching of French there for him. Now, Alexander Dumas, the Lion of French literature, he wrote all of the D'Artagnan series, the 5 books there, and he also wrote Count of Monte Cristo and La Reine Margot and a lot. When you know how to write like him, you can always write a good story, and this book was enchanting, particularly the first half of it. It follows a character called Cornelius de Brael, who lives in the 7 provinces in the Netherlands, and he takes up tulip growing during the height of tulip mania. Now, he's quite well to do, and he begins to develop tulips long after his neighbour had already begun developing them himself. His neighbour is a man called Boxtel, and he loved growing tulips, and then Cornelius gets into it, and Cornelius has got a lot more money, so he begins growing lots of tulips and developing lots of different ways to experiment with them. At this time, the Horticultural Society for Tulip Growers in Holland offers a 100,000 franc prize for the first person who can make a black tulip, hence the title. And Boxtel has become obsessed with Cornelius because Cornelius has the money and he's jealous of what he can do. And he begins to watch him through a telescope, all of his actions. He begins to see him developing different types of tulips. And he just becomes obsessed with bringing Cornelius down. Now, the way he does it is quite interesting. Cornelius is related, he's the godson of someone who was classed as a traitor in the Dutch provinces and was put to death right early on in the book. And somebody connects Cornelius de Brael with this traitor, says, you know, is the godson. And you see Cornelius sent to prison. But he's still got this love of the black tulip. It's his life. It's what he wants to do. He was on the brink of making it, of growing it. And now he's in prison. So what happens? This book is good. I enjoyed it. The first half flew past. Now, I'm only going to rate it, though, as a 3 out of 5. And there's a reason for this. Dumas seems to not have lost interest. But his ending to this book, past halfway, maybe 2/3, the last third of the book, just becomes cliche. And it's a sad thing. You still want to read it. You still want to know how it all works out. The last third of the book just falls into this cliche trope, this sort of standard format of concluding and wrapping up a book, which was lazy of Dumas when he can do so much better, as can be seen in some of his great works. I think the reason for him doing it, I could be wrong, but he wrote this book in 1849, 50. He had gone bankrupt. He had to sell his chateau. He had sold his theatre because he used to put on quite a lot of plays in his time, Dumas did. And I think what he was doing was knocking out a novel to get some money. And he started it with real gusto, and it was brilliant. But then I think he just wanted to wrap it up to get it selling. That's how it appears to me reading this book. I think, you know, he just was churning out literature for money. Personally, I was happy with how it ended, but not how he wrote himself to that conclusion. I just thought it was so obvious. From the moment you see the Black Tulip, you know everything. You can work out everything that's going to happen. So 3 out of 5. It's not a bad read. It's an easy read to get through, but it's not Dumas at his finest. Anyway, that's my 5 books for this month that I read. That's the wrap up of them. I hope that you've enjoyed what I've gone through. And can I ask that if you want me to carry on doing wrap ups of my month's reading and cover them like this with no spoilers, please, 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 will you leave a comment that you want me to carry on doing that? Because I don't want to do things which no one's interested in. But if you enjoy this, I will happily keep on producing sort of a light summary of the books that I've read, not just going in depth with every book that I read. You might also want to keep a lookout on my channel if you want to hear an in-depth review of Perfume and an in-depth review of the Mayor of Casterbridge, because they will be coming up. So I wish you joy in your reading.